Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining the third webinar of this series, which is part of the pilot implementation process of the European Resilience Management Guideline with the involvement of 9 cities, the so-called Tier 3. In order to enhance cities' capacity to resist, absorb, and recover from the effects of climate change, the EU-funded Horizon 2020 project Smart Mature Resilience is developing standardized approaches and tools to support the development of climate resilience strategies. The project has engaged with 3 partner cities and also 4 peer reviewer cities in an iterative pilot implementation process that presented the tools and trained also stakeholders in using them by discussing how this can contribute to the overall resilience building process and how they feed into an integrated management system for resilience planning that can be transferred to the local context of other cities, regions, and countries. Considering a co-creation approach in the methodology has enabled to gather detailed information and understand what cities are expecting from this European Resilience Management Guideline. And all the information gathered has helped cities to highlight existing challenges and associated problems regarding resilience building at local level. As a final step, the project is developing is implementing a final pilot process with the 9 Tier 3 cities that we are happy to have with us today. For the city representatives that were not able to join, this the webinar is also recorded and will be published on the Smart Mature Resilience website. One of the tools that are being developed throughout the project is the Risk Systemicity Questionnaire. And in this webinar, we are going to focus in this one, which is also included and used in the second step in operationalizing resilience, which has the name risk awareness. We have with us Susan Hovig from the Strathclyde Business School, who is one of the tool developers of the Risk Systemicity Questionnaire, and she is here to present the tool to you and to also answer your questions about how to use the tool and how to implement it in your own city context. Susan?
Yes.
Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Making you a presenter, and you can take over from now on.
Okay. Remember what to do.
Exactly.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Thank you, Vasilios. So what I plan to do in this webinar is to give a short introduction to the objectives of the Risk Systemicity Questionnaire and what its key features are, before then turning to the tool itself and giving you a short tutorial on its use. So as Vasilios said, the RSQ, the Risk Systemicity Questionnaire, is one of 5 tools being produced by the Smart Mature Resilience project. Now, before getting into the detail of the tool, it's worth noting the role it can play with respect to building resilience in a city. The quote shown on this slide highlights a key part of building resilience is to actively understand the risk landscape. The RSQ can help in doing this by facilitating discussion to identify the risks that are a priority for a city to manage, so that the city can become more resilient. So the tool contributes to the risk assessment and risk management, but it takes a very different perspective on risk compared to traditional tools. Traditional risk assessment tools, such as a risk register, assumes that risks are independent from one another. However, in reality, this isn't the case. Instead, individual risks can impact one another. So, for example, the existence of one risk may increase the possibility of another risk occurring. Therefore, the RSQ considers what we call the systemicity of risks and this means that it's concerned with how different risks interact with one another. When this occurs, their consequences can be complex. So, for example, risks may set up a chain of consequences that feed back on themselves, creating a cycle of events that continue to reinforce each other and continue to get worse over time. And this is known as a vicious cycle. To be able to fully appreciate and take account of such consequences, we need to consider risk as being as not being independent from one another. Instead, we need to focus on risks where a number of risks and their interactions with one another are considered together as a part of risk assessment and risk mitigation. This also means that any actions that are taken need to take account of their impact on the risk scenarios rather than just individual risks. The RFQ has been built to support cities in promoting discussion and raising awareness about the risk landscape that they face and the risk scenarios which are of greatest priority to them. The RFQ does this through presenting a series of risk scenarios which may appear as networks of risks or vicious cycles for the city to consider. These scenarios have been based on expert judgment from our partner cities that have been involved in the SMR project, and also through evidence from the literature. However, we do expect for any city using the tool that the discussions promoted by the RFQ are likely to result in amendments to these risk scenarios, or new ideas of risk scenarios coming forward, which add to the existing scenarios, as a city can use the tool to tailor scenarios to their own context. Through using the RFQ, a city can identify high priority areas so that it can make best use of its limited resources. The tool also includes example mitigation actions, so that once the city has identified those risk scenarios that are of highest priority to them, they can consider examples of actions which they may wish to take to mitigate these risks. Now, there are a number of groups which may benefit from use of the RFQ. Firstly, city resilience teams can use the RFQ on a regular basis to monitor the changing impact of risk scenarios on a city's resilience strategy. And as part of the process, they may wish to use the tool with politicians to help support discussion and awareness building on important risk areas for the city. Another group that may wish to use RFQ are city project teams. They may benefit from using the RFQ to consider the impact of risk scenarios on the success of a planned project, and also to consider how the consequence of the project may impact the city. Lastly, the RFQ can be used as an engagement tool with focus groups of city stakeholders to help raise awareness of specific issues facing a city, and thus enable the city to gain an understanding of a wide set of views with respect to the impact of risk and how those risks should be managed. When we come to look at the RFQ, you will see that its key focus is on presenting a range of risk scenarios for discussion. Some of these will be causal chains of events, and some will be vicious cycles. The RFQ is structured as 10 topics, each containing a number of scenarios. Although each scenario is presented one at a time, it's important to recognise that these scenarios interact with one another. So, for example, if you decide one scenario is not relevant for your particular city, then other scenarios may automatically be switched off also. As previously mentioned, the RFQ also presents possible strategies that have been offered as tried and tested actions by our partner cities to try and mitigate the risk scenarios. After discussing each of the scenarios and deciding upon whether it's possible these scenarios may occur in your city, The RFQ then presents a summary of the risk scenarios that have been considered, along with a ranking of each scenario. This ranking that's presented by the tool is based on two things. Firstly, the user response regarding whether or not the scenario is likely to occur in your city. And secondly, it's based on a measure of the relative impact of that scenario. And this is based on analysis of its impact in the network of risks that have been developed through expert judgment from our partner cities and through evidence from the literature. Now, the purpose of providing a ranking of the risk scenarios is again to promote discussion about those risk scenarios that are of highest priority to your city, and thus where your city should focus its resources. Possible mitigation strategies can then be considered for these scenarios. Also, by using comment boxes provided in the tool, it's possible to create a tailored summary of those actions that are of most relevance for your city. So that's really a very short introduction to the RFQ. This has presented what risk systemicity is and how the RFQ tool supports the city in promoting discussion about risks and their systemicity. So I'm now going to go on to look at the RFQ itself. But before doing so, just as a note to say that the tool is available for downloading from the SMR website. However, it's probably worth noting that we're currently making some small improvements to the way in which the relative impact of risk scenarios are calculated in the tool. And as we wait until the beginning of next month, a revised version of the tool will be available. So I'll now move on to the actual tool itself. So the tool, the RFQ tool, is an Excel-based tool. And we can see here we have a first introductory page. Now, I previously mentioned there's a number of groups that may wish to use the RFQ. So we talked about city resilience team, project teams, focus groups, and maybe politicians. So in the introductory page, you can record what your name is, that's generally facilitator of the group, and who the group is that's come together, and also the dates for when the session took place. There's also brief introductions to the brief instructions for the RFQ, and this is similar to the introductions that I just given. So looking at how the RFQ fits into risk and resilience, explaining a bit about its particular perspective on risk, which is about risk systemicity, looking at how the RFQ works towards a better understanding of risk landscapes and the particular types of scenarios that may be presented. It then goes on to look at how the scenarios will be presented within the tool. So as a narrative, and as we'll go on to see, also as pictures. And also an example of how the mitigation strategies are presented in the tool. And finally, how the resulting rankings of the scenarios are also presented. So a short instructions guide is embedded in that first page. The one caveat with using the Excel-based tool is that you need to be able to enable macros, as that is what's making the tool work behind the scenes. So we can fill that in with whatever, for information, make some information with whoever is part of the group that we are working with. And then we turn to the different risk topics that are covered. Now, with our SMR project, our focus is on climate change, social dynamics, and critical infrastructure. So therefore, the topics that emerged for the RFQ also came from initial discussions around these three different topics. And what we resulted with is 10 different topics. We can see along the bottom. We have elderly population, social cohesion, social alienation, inequalities, flooding, air pollution, health, community integration, public unrest, and critical infrastructure. So, which of these topics you want to begin with depends on the objectives of the group coming together and which topics are of most interest to that group. For a city resilience team, it's likely you want to cover all the topics, but for instance, for a focus group, it may be you want to focus on particular issues, say social issues, and just look at the particular topics associated with that context. So let's go on to the first topic, which in the RFQ is elderly population. And this is how all the topic pages look. You're presented with a number of scenarios and asked for your judgment about whether or not these scenarios are highly probable, probable, improbable, we don't know, or I don't know for your particular city context. We don't know means we just can't assess that for our particular city. I don't know, someone else does means that, well, actually, we may need other people to join our group to be able to answer that question. So the first question on all the topics is an overall question, and in this case, is your city likely to be subject to increasing elderly population? So this is really just saying, is this topic of interest to your group? Because if you say, no, it's improbable, then the whole of this topic will vanish because the whole of this topic is based on elderly population. So let's say for just going through an example of this, let's say, yes, this is highly probable for our city. So then you just double click on the particular response you want to give. Now the first question is always just an overall question to see whether this topic's of interest to your group. And then the remaining questions are the scenarios themselves. So if we get onto the first scenario, we can see this is presented as both text, but we can also view it as a picture. I'll cancel that just now so we can read the text. So in this particular scenario, we are presenting a scenario to the group, and the facilitator would read that out to the group and say, okay, so for our particular city, is it probable that later retirement ages will mean pensions come later in life, and elderly citizens working longer, which means a role strain between caring for aged friends and partners, and the need to remain in employment causing increasing work-related stress for aged citizens, and an increase in breakdown of the family structure and our poor quality of life for the elderly poor, leading to increased social alienation and loneliness for the aged citizens, and so reducing social cohesion in the city. So you can see there we're not focusing on particular risk, we're presenting a scenario for the future and saying, is this something that is of concern for your city? And again, we can see that same scenario as a picture. It's simply providing both options means that some people we have found prefer reading from the text, and some people are more visual and prefer looking at the scenario through a picture. So hopefully what will happen is by presenting that to the group, there'll be discussion that will ensue from that presentation. And there's bound to be differing opinions. And sometimes that discussion can take time to work through. As whoever's facilitating the group wants to try and let the group actually have a discussion around the topic and then try to guide them towards one of the responses. So do we believe that it's highly probable, probable, improbable, we don't know, or I don't know, but if we get somebody else in the room, I think they might know the answer. As you can see above, to try and give people a guidance of what these terms mean, we've attached loose probabilities to each of the first three of them. Now, we really are focusing on using this tool as a discussion mechanism. So we've provided comment boxes as well. So throughout the discussion, the facilitator can actually take a lot of notes about what discussion has been happening to try and encapsulate that discussion for later records. So let's say they think, yes, this is a probable scenario. So we'll double click this. And then we can move on to the next scenario. The next one in the elderly topic And I'll view the picture here. Families are increasingly living far away from one another, which means an isolation risk of the elderly, leading to isolation and loneliness and a breakdown in the family structure, and therefore increased social alienation and reduced social cohesion. So again, the facilitator will present that scenario and get the group to discuss what their thoughts are on whether that's something that's a probable scenario for your particular context, and try to get a response. So let's say that one's highly probable, and hopefully encapsulate and summarise the discussion that takes place within the comments box. So just for time purposes, I've actually already responded to the rest of the scenarios within this topic. So we have single household, aged citizens, digital marginalisation, dementia and the elderly, mental health and loneliness, alcohol abuse, healthcare under pressure, social welfare and family support. Now you might have noticed that some of the topic headings are different colours. We have one here in red and one here in purple. There's quite a few in this particular topic that are given in purple. The reason for that is if it's a purple heading, it means that this particular scenario also occurs in one of the other topics. And this is because it's very difficult to actually say that everything under elderly population, for instance, does not necessarily also occur under social cohesion, or may actually, some of the scenarios may actually also occur under health. So you'll see there's interaction between the topics because some scenarios appear across multiple topics. So we've given a response to each of the scenarios in this topic. When we get to the bottom, we can see there's a button here that says See Risk Mitigating Actions. Now if we click on that and say yes, then it takes us back up to the top, and there's a new button here that says View Mitigating Actions. And when we click on the picture again, we can see that there's actions associated with parts of these scenarios. So for instance, if I click here, we can see a number of particular strategies that you might want to consider for those scenarios that you felt highly probable to occur in your city. Now, as mentioned in the introduction, these strategies we mainly developed from tried and tested strategies from our partner cities, but also looking at literature with respect to how other cities have handled these types of risks. Now you may say, okay, some of them are of interest to us and want to grab hold of them. You can copy and paste them into the comment box as well to keep a record for yourself. So for instance, if some of these I think, okay, this looks interesting to us, then I can copy this and I can save it into my record sheet and come back to that later. It's not only up here, but we see mitigating actions throughout, where again we can come, if this is a highly probable scenario, we can view actions here from people, from other cities that have given tried and tested strategies. So that's us completed topic one. Let's just look at one other topic. So we'll move to the second one, which is social cohesion. Now if we go down this topic, you'll see that some of the buttons have already been answered. And this is because these particular scenarios also occurred in the previous elderly population. And so because we answered them in that topic, they're automatically answered where they appear elsewhere in the RSQ. So again, with a similar situation, we can look at each of the scenarios, we can get the group to discuss it, we can take comments about what their discussions are about, and we can give our responses about whether or not we believe the scenarios to be probable for our city. So for instance, if I want to answer a few here, let's say reduced social cohesion is something we're concerned about. Disengagement with citizens, let's say that's probable, and so on. I won't respond to them all, just to give you an idea of going down this particular topic. And again, if you were to answer all the scenarios in this topic, there is a button to allow you to see the risk mitigating actions as we did before. So you can go through different topics depending on what's of interest to your group and your city. And the discussion itself should hopefully prompt some ideas and prompt some consideration of strategy. Now, what we've found when we've been working with groups with the risk scenarios is that some of them say, okay, well, most of the scenario is actually of interest to my city, but it's not quite there. There's a part of the detail don't quite fit in my city. And if that's the case, you can actually edit the scenarios to fit your city a little bit. You can't delete lines because that would interfere with the background coding. But if there's particular words that don't quite relate to your city, you can edit individual lines, as long as the overall sense of the scenario stays the same. But again, you can also recognise that specific context to your city through adding comments against each of the scenarios. So once you've done all that, what do we get out from the RSQ? Well, we have a comment sheet here. We don't really have many comments in. We can see we made one. I cut and paste a strategy for one of the scenarios from the elderly population. But this comment sheet would be able to capture all the comments that you actually create throughout the discussions that take place within the group. But a key page is the final page, which is the priority page. And this basically, when we go onto here, we'll look at everything you've responded to and provide a ranking of what the RSQ believes to be of most importance for your city. So as mentioned in the introduction, this is based on two things. This ranking is firstly based on the user's response regarding whether or not the scenario is likely to happen in the city, but also what the impact of that scenario might be. And that's based on a measure of the relative impact of each scenario, which is based on an analysis of its impact in the networks of risks that's been developed through engagement with our partner cities. And you can actually look at this in different ways. So we can say, okay, there's a general ranking, which we've been given automatically. We can do it per topic. So we looked at elderly. We can just look at the elderly up at the top and look at those that are ranked the most important for the elderly. We started looking at social cohesion. So we have a few, we could just look at social cohesion and what are the most important areas. Again, let's go back to the overall ranking. This is obviously just based on what we've replied to within the RSQ so far. So it's only those scenarios that we've looked at. Now, alongside the ranking given by the RSQ, there's also a user ranking. So obviously the RSQ is presenting what it believes to be those scenarios that you may want to consider further and think particularly hard about with respect to mitigation actions. But in itself, the ranking may promote discussion within the group. Some of the groups say, well, I maybe don't quite agree with that. What's number 3 in the ranking, I feel is number 1. So you can actually tweak this ranking by discussing and thinking about what your own ranking would be. And therefore, where you think you should be actually focusing your limited resources on when it comes to mitigation actions. So, as a final note, I just want to make one point, which is it's very important to recall that the RSQ does not give you a specific answer to follow. It's a tool to support and promote discussion about risks in a structured way. So its overall aim is to support a group to come to a consensus on priority areas of concern for the city, so that the city can make best use of its limited resources. And hopefully in this way, helps to target the most appropriate actions in a city's journey to becoming more resilient. So I don't know if anybody has any questions to ask at this point.
If someone has a question, maybe please unmute your microphones first. No questions, I guess?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Per from Malmö.
Hi.
Hi, I'm quite new to this. I just began in my position 2 weeks ago, so I've not followed the discussion before. But I wonder if you have any, how do you say, any sources for the different strategies that are coming up in the, so that we can read more about it. That they are evidence-based, or how did you come up with the different strategies?
So the majority of the strategies were suggestions from the partner cities within the SMR project. So there's 7 partner cities. So they have mainly been tried and tested by each of these cities specifically. So we don't actually have a city name. We did actually speak to the city representatives and said, you know, could we put a city's name beside it? But they were concerned that there wouldn't be one particular person within the city that could be directed to for somebody to find out more information. But certainly if there was directed ones, we would probably be able to highlight who that came from and individually put you in touch with them if there was particular ones you were interested in.
Yep, okay. Thanks.
There is also a question from the city of Thessaloniki. They can hear us, but they cannot. They have a problem with the microphone.
Okay.
And one moment, I'm going to read it. You mentioned that the tool can be used as a debate tool. Would the ranking of risks that the RSQ is providing be more subject to personal opinions of the participating employees of the city, or do you think that it can resolve conflicts within a team about the importance of a risk, or it would create more issues probably?
Yeah, I think that's very team dependent and who you're bringing together and whether they have a common goal and a common interest. What the RSQ is trying to do is just highlight areas where, based on other cities' experiences, where it's believed that there may be particular issues for going forward and becoming more resilient. At the end of the day, this is to demonstrate where priority areas are, where you might want to put your resources. So I think the winner will be whoever holds the purse strings for these resources. And I think debate's good, but if you get a good enough facilitator, then they should be able to help a group converge towards a common goal and a common output and a common focus for action.
Good. Any other questions? Okay, then if not, maybe we can close here. Susan, would you like to add something, some closing information, or?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the cities that participated today. And as also we said at the beginning of the webinar, we're going to upload the webinar on the SMR website, and then you can share it also with your colleagues or other interested parties in your cities or municipalities. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to Susan and to Strathclyde Business School for joining us, and to all the cities. And we're gonna meet you all at the SMR stakeholder workshop in a couple of weeks. So have a nice evening.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, Vasilius. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.